Hey, what's up, guys and gals? Bathed in Brenna here with DarkMatter. Thanks so much for coming by today. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, man. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, so thanks so much, everyone, for stopping by. I'm going to be interviewing DarkMatter today about a few topics. For those of you that are unfamiliar with DarkMatter, he has established himself in the Dark Souls 3 community as one of the very best pure Pyro casters. So we're going to talk with him about that today. So let's start with, how did you get into Soulsborne games?
Well, it's actually around my friend's house just before Christmas in about 2011. He was trying to rope me into playing the game with the free building style and the whole mix and match, whatever you want, however you want, freedom you had in the build. And I quite like the idea of it. It's a good throwback to older games like Baldur's Gate and Final Fantasy VII.
So how long have you played Dark Souls games? How much do you play and practice?
Well, since my introduction, I bought my own copy just after Christmas in the sales. The game wasn't really very popular, so I just, had a little browse around and I looked over the game. I seen all the weapons it had and the flashy spells, and yeah, I thought it was nice having the oversized weapons. It was not something I've been used to seeing. Looking at the Black Knight Ultra, that was pretty cool. And yeah, Great Chaos, that was a good seller for me. I kind of played that by myself-ish for about 6 or so months, and then I met some Irish dude by the name of Brian, who filled me in on God knows how much that I'd missed, all the details and the intricate tech of Dark Souls, and yeah, that kind of stuck me to the series and stuck me to him. As for practice, I was still learning and still picking things up when I met that dude, and I was still undecided what I wanted to main, so I was sort of, just dabbling in everything, really.
What were your early experiences with Dark Souls like?
Well, the first couple of things that really drew me in was obviously the map layout being absolutely amazing in Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2, the lore being told through a different medium that I wasn't really used to, by items and a few lines and tidbits from the NPCs, but mainly just trying to search all the loot and find who done what where and which order. That was pretty awesome. And then exploring through Dark Souls 2, having more enemies chucked in, that was not something I was expecting. And yeah, kind of hiding from invaders at the start, not wanting to get my ass kicked too much, but I had to admire the skill and dedication to the builds people come in and just shreked me with. Only bitter thing was the whole pointing down afterwards.
At what point did you know or decide you were going to continue playing Dark Souls?
Ooh. I don't know, really. I mean, after meeting my Irish buddy, we sort of had a little weekend routine on the go. We both had spare time on a Friday and Saturday, and the more I sort of spent time with him doing the weapon tech, and the more I spent my time invading on my own will, spell casting on different builds, I never got bored of it, so I just kind of stuck with Dark Souls 1 until number 2 came out.
So you are known throughout the Dark Souls community as a try-hard, pure Pyro caster. How did that come about you started playing a Pyro?
Well, it was actually a very cowardly tactic for the first couple of weeks of trying to invade people, trying to hide behind the enemies, just throwing fireballs and lightning spears. After a while, I kind of got a bit more confident in, approach people a bit more head-on, but the Dark Root Forest was not a very forgiving place. But it kept me entertained. The animation was always a big seller for me. I mainly quite liked it in Dark Souls 2. All the different spells being chucked out at the same time. I mean, when I found that Black Witch Staff, it was amazing, being able to cast anything and everything in whatever order I felt like on a whim. It was just, it just opened up a lot more opportunities for me. I could just be free, just like a quality build, but in casting. And then after I had a look around on that game a little bit with my buddy I mentioned earlier, he pointed me towards Vati and Sunlight Blade, and those two dudes sort of filled in a lot of gaps in the lore, and then more gaps in builds and build ideas. I was like, yep, I want to be in those videos one day.
Did you always lean towards casters in PvE, or what are your PvE builds like, if you have any?
The reason's probably a little bit anticlimactic. Kind of just like the extra range and extra space that pyros and spells gave in general. In Dark Souls 1, fireballs were quite short-ranged for the ranged option, but the range kind of increased each title afterwards. And what really helped me more towards casting was just the really nice animations they put into the games. The fireballs exploding had a nice aura, lit everything up, and the dark spells having that nice white flash to them. And then Affinity, when that came around in the DLC in the first game, or Pursuers, whatever it was called, it was had a nice dark purple glow to it. And I always thought the lava was really well done for that age of game. And then in number 3, after all those flashy, nice animations and combos coming out, and I kind of found the Parting Flame after the first DLC dropped, and that was really revolutionary for me. Changed combo potentials and increased a bit more melee viability with the lovely Parting Flame, Black Flame. That was just what I needed, really.
So Pyro builds can be difficult to play in any Souls title, but you seem to handle it with ease. To what do you attribute your victories? Practice? Or playing with certain people? Fight clubs?
Well, early on, I kind of befriended a absolute random guy who was really intrigued with my playstyle, a dude which got later known as Evil Script. After I played against him a couple of matches, he got me on mic and he wanted to show me other fights, other weapons, other options. I mean, the game was brand new, so everything was new to me. So I simply watched him fighting loads of people in fight clubs that he used to host, and I kind of noticed when I was watching that the general population sort of had a very similar movement sort of pattern to them. Everyone dodged the same way and always tried to run around the same sort of weapons and the same sort of spacing, so I eventually got a bit brave, brought out my PvE build with some PvE spells, and kind of found that people didn't have a clue to what I was doing. I fast forward to Ashes of Ariandel, and then the arena showed up. So I went up against lots of people with the unnumbered health, really gimped. But the new tool in my kit was Parting Flame. That fundamentally changed my playstyle more than I would have realized back then. It gave me more combos, faster melee, and floating chaos. That was awesome to have for some backup. Gets people, dancing to my tune and feeding into my playstyle. Then going forward again to, I think, just after the Ring City, I had questions for people as I was kind of quite settled in my own knowledge, my own playstyle. I didn't really know who to ask or where to go for answers. So I eventually got roped into a tournament hosted by a KH Knight, and we got put into a big group chat. And once people seen my first couple of matches, people were really supportive and liked watching me and wanted to encourage me, so they gave me loads of alternatives and different approaches to things I have not thought of before, which I thought was quite nice.
So give us the rundown on a 2020 pure Pyro variant you may be comfortable playing.
Yeah, I've got a couple I want to share. Spell selection is usually the most important thing you want to focus on first. That will govern and dictate what setups and traps and your range and your spacing that you want to have. And the other one is your FP you want to have. Obviously, we all know about the Dark Moon Ring, but there's not really a viable alternative to extend your FP on spells. So you can take the FP build once you're a bit more comfy with the spells you've chosen, and you don't need a filler or something to occupy moments you find a little bit odd. It's a pretty great way for outlasting other casters. The general consensus people go for is usually 18 or 24 attunement, So having 30 or 40, even if you've got more expensive spells, you can generally outlast them and get in for that lovely punish on the Ashen Chug, which I am so a victim to. But it lets you close in a bit more on those guys and go for that lovely Black Flame finisher. Quite a nice one to finish on.
Pyromancers can be set up a vast number of ways in Dark Souls 3. Each way could be uniquely good for that specific player. What tips would you give for playing a Pyro build and finding what works for them?
First and foremost is finding each individual's comfy range. Obviously weapons have different ranges and people approach different weapons different ways. So once you know what you're comfortable with and what you want to use, then you work backwards from there really. If you're going to be using more of a melee setup, obviously Black Flame is a must. You can mix in some flame fans for that slower R2 strafing sort of action catching. Fire Surge is usually recommended, but in tournaments you don't usually get tiers, so Surge isn't really that necessary. Boulder Heave's quite a nice mix up, depending on which weapon you want to pair it up with. Then once you've found your comfy weapon, comfy range, then you can start experimenting with different spell combos. There's quite a few weapons actually which combo into a Black Flame. Some have longer combo chains than others. Obviously, difficulty of landing, that's usually something people pay attention to. It's very difficult to hit the Demon's Great Axe into a Flame Fan and Black Flame. Difficult, not impossible, but if you're a fan of the weapon, then it'll be worth it. And then the final sort of tidbit to chuck on, as you're going to have the attunement, is nice mix-ups. So if you're going with a melee setup, you want to have a couple of ranged spells, help you chase people down, Floating Chaos, Bursting Fireball. Black Serpent is a bit of a strange spell to try and use with a weapon. People tend to always come in and try to punish it. If you've got a faster weapon, that would be good. If your weapon's a bit slower, it's probably not going to be so good. But yeah, the mix-ups in weapons and spells is always good.
Obviously Demon Scar has its place on a Pyro build. What do you think about Witch's Locks, or other weapons a player could pick using a Pyro build?
Yeah, see, spell choice can either complement the weapon, or it can work against your weapon choice. With things like the Witch's Locks, they have has a good range, but it's not particularly fast at starting up. So a decent melee deterrent in the spells will make up for the Witch's Locks' slower speed, so Parting Flame, Black Flame with that would be good. But the Witch's Locks has a fast rolling R1, which is quite nice. If you're going to be a bit more flippant and a bit more nimble using the rolling attacks, then Lava Puddles and Floating Chaos, they'll play well into the setup. The thing with the Scar is that you kind of want people to be up on you, so you need to have melee spells. There's not really much point having range because you're going to be in people's faces. Onyx Blades are a little bit different, well, great swords in general if you want to use them. You've got to have poise, some heavier armor, and that comes from two-handing. So having spells that either work whilst they're put away, or just for a finisher or timing mix-ups, that's always good. But other things to consider is what your weapon is good at, what it struggles with, and how you can either encourage the situation to make your weapons better, or try to discourage its weaknesses. Things like Affinity in the Crucifix of the Mad King. Once you've got Affinity up, a turnaround shot with Affinity into an R1 becomes a viable combo and makes your attack a lot faster than just a standard R1. I mean, the weapon art is a bit more RNG, but you can chuck on anything else to help that out really. And then if people have any questions or queries, if they want to put anything together, just ask me in the comments and I'll see if I can try and come up with something. It's a little bit of a minefield of preferences and scenarios and playstyles, but you can work around most things.
Do you mind going over some of the pyromancies that you like best, or think are most useful for PvP, and why?
Likes and usefulness. Well, Two spells I probably never leave without is probably Great Chaos and Black Flame. Black Flame needs no introduction, it's just awesome as a melee deterrent, does all the damage you need. And Great Chaos has a few, it's a little bit slower, but it's got a few variable uses which is quite good for PvP. You can punish predictable behaviour, people rolling, for example. It combos with your other spells like Black Flame, and it can cover you for an Ashen Chug, just chugging it on the floor, lingering around it. I mean, yeah, going back to Black Flame, it's just a big no to people idly hanging around outside of normal curved sword or straight sword range. Just half a step in and Black Flame and you're done. It's a good duck in and duck out. And both Pyromancy gloves put together, that's a hell of a damaging combination. Usually about 1100-1200ish damage. Unfortunately, I've got a nasty bias towards Black Serpent and Seething Chaos. I just love the way those two spells look. Black Serpent's got a bit of a reputation for being easily punished, but I kind of think that stems from people not using it at the correct range and getting the timing wrong. It's in PvE it's pretty good for the mobs, they don't try to avoid it ever, so you get guaranteed combos against certain enemies. And the people, when they're evading Black Serpent, they have to move. You can't just be idle, you have to roll it just to be sure. Sometimes the spell's a bit more homing than it was the last time, and it can catch some people off sometimes. At different ranges for Black Serpent, what I find it really good is that you can, at longer ranges, you can combo it with Great Chaos and Bursting Fireball. If they're trying to come in to punish and they're quite close, you can Black Flame them. If they're not that close, Flame Fang can catch people. The whole strafing ideology kind of just unlock and, swing it around to where they're going is pretty good. And Seething Chaos is just an omen, a dodgy area. People know they're okay for a few seconds in, but they don't want to get caught by anything, and they don't want to be lingering around inside that area. In PvE it's pretty funny, because a lot of the enemies will just turn and face it, and if it's a little bit out of their range, they're actually drawn to it, and they just walk up to the spell and just stare at it until it blows up. It's quite entertaining. What else is there? Floating Chaos. That's pretty good. That can help you have an Ashen for free as well. And it's a nice little addition to have. You can pair that up with a few other spells as well. Floating Chaos staggered with Bursting's got a nice range combo. Not great damage, but they're both cheap spells. And they're active when you're not, which is always a bonus.
So we all know clerics, or faith builds, do not do well in Dark Souls 3 due to a few various reasons. However, Pyromancers have access to some powerful spells and weapons. Did you always prefer Pyromancy over Sorcery? What are your thoughts on sorceries in Dark Souls 3?
Well, in Dark Souls 3, man, I have to admit, my first PvP build was a Moonlight Sorcerer sort of parry bait setup, inspired by my previously mentioned buddy Brian. I did start the class as a Pyro because I knew what I wanted to go back to through my previous experience with that game and the others in the past, but the Pyro Moonlight was a nice little half step as well. Mixed in some sorceries into that too. Obviously sorceries being faster to cast and cheaper, and having the locked on ability kind of eased me into my playstyle. The Kestus used to parry a lot faster as well back then, so that was really quite nice. When you're finding your feet with these sort of builds, having things like the Crystal Chime and just sacrificing a little bit of damage to mix a couple of disciplines together was quite nice and really helpful, to be honest. You can just buy yourself some time with some Crystal Hail or Homing Soulmass. If people are too far away, you're not confident with the aiming, Great Soul Arrow. It's just, that spell alone is faster than any Pyro with most ranges. Can't really beat that really. I mean, when I was learning to free aim, like I said, I just mashed the two styles together. If I was confident in a shot, then I'd get the Pyros on the go. If I was a bit unfamiliar with somebody's play style, or they're using like a seldom used weapon, I would just whip out the sorceries and carry on. But as flashy and shiny as sorceries are, I didn't really have the flair needed to stick with playing a sorcery build. I kind of liked the mixed melee and range that Pyro can do. The turning around humming soul mass is a bit slow for my pace. Humming soul mass has quite a profound impact on how people approach a fight. They can't just charge in and do the usual spacing. You know, those dudes tend to be turned away and just very reactive. I mean, I think the play is superior to Pyromancy. A good example would be Robert Haunting. At the time, he was non-untouchable with his Humming Soul Mass sword and board play, but it's just not really me. But good times though, good times.
So a dark quality sword and board build and a Pawn of Night curved sword build are two of the most powerful meta PvP builds. What advice would you give a Pyro dueling those builds?
They're both pretty mean matchups, man. There's a lot of variables between individuals. Some people can play them quite differently from the standard whatever's been put on YouTube. People copy and paste. I mean, the best advice I can possibly give is, whilst you're at range, try and get in some good alpha damage. You know, some free aims of great chaos, some bursting, floating chaos. Whatever your more ranged choices are, that would be one way to chip away at them early. Most sword and board users, they're kind of using the Black Knight shield, or they should be, against the Pyromancers. So you'll need to land after they've done a couple of R1s. You probably will try and catch them with a Parting Flame, Black Flame to try and break their guard. Go for a riposte afterwards, or if they're a bit more cautious than that, then you can always aim some great chaos behind them. That gets around their shield quite well, opens up a little bit. Curved sword is probably the most difficult one to face up against, because it wins against the majority of builds. That's why it's so good. If they're running around, you can try and catch them with Black Flame while they're guarding and, you know, popping it on and off and sprinting. That's an instant guard break and then riposte, but framing that while they're trying to strafe around you or trying to bait them in, I wouldn't really recommend getting too close to them. Putting Seething Chaos down around you is a good way to make sure they don't ever do the staggered R1s. It's quite a good insurance policy, but again, that's very intensive for FP, and you can't really just cast one spell over and over and over. It gets very predictable, and you've still got windows inside of that casting to be punished. Then maybe mixing Seething up with some Floating Chaos and, you know, Black Serpents, frame some spells, try and catch the rolls. That's probably the best you can do, really. I mean, you just got to keep those dudes away from you. They are the two best builds for a reason, you know?
So as Dark Souls 3 has gotten older, the dueling aspect has slowed down a lot. However, due to many people still doing playthroughs in PvE, invasions in Dark Souls 3 are a good way to find PvP. Do you do invasions on your Pyro? What advice would you give pertaining to do invasions with a Pyro build in contrast to dueling?
Invasions. The best thing I've found with invasions is to have a build that has the ability just to delete a non-synced White Phantom in one combo. I tend to run a 45-45 Int and Faith setup, so the Black Flame combo, obviously most people know this, but the Pyro Glove true combos into the Parting Flame, just dropping it in there, and stick on the Blindfold Mask, you know, really max out that damage, make sure there's going to be no survivors. Invasions are, as a caster, you tend to be more mobile, so you don't really get much value from Seething Chaos or Floating Chaos or Black Serpent. It kind of just depends on your the areas, you know, different areas, you know, lend themselves better to certain spells. Places which have high verticality, like Grand Archives and Catacombs, lend themselves more to Profane Flame and Boulder Heave, whereas locations which has like narrow passageways and good choke points, like Irithel Dungeon and certain parts of Ariandel, I would take Black Serpent, and Great Chaos is my standard. The main thing to do with using a caster against multiple opponents in invasions is using the scenery to your best advantage. Most people don't really pay attention to this, but when you're using spells, elevation is kind of a negative thing when you're invading. if you're trying to throw uphill, you lose a lot of range because of the arc of the spell, and then when you're aiming downhill, the spells have a max range where they just disappear, so you can lose out on those two little aspects and areas. But it's just something to be mindful for, that's all.
What would you change about Dark Souls 3, if anything? Is there anything you can't stand and don't think should be in the game?
For this one, I'll do one good and one bad, I think. One thing I think would have made a huge difference with the state of spell casting in the meta would have been given each flagship ability, each spell, like Crystal Soul Spear, Sunlight Spear, and Great Chaos Fire Orb. I think giving them the innate ability to have hyper armor would have really changed how people approach the game's PvE and PvP. I know we have casting catalysts which can, grant poise to Faith, and there's a few little regular rounds of transferring the poise over, and you can cast as poise stuff, but having that innate ability on just those three would open up more weapon combos and more spell combos. People would have looked into it a bit sooner, If they had those abilities, that would have made the game builds a bit more varied, It would be a bit more interesting to play. Speaking of interesting, the thing I'd probably remove would probably be the Demon Star, as it's kind of funneled too many people down the same path, and people haven't really explored outside of using that weapon. Not too many people know other weapons before the Demon Star came along actually comboed with Parting Flame. It kind of just limited people, and the playstyle is just very copy-paste, and the build's always the same. It's just mundane and boring. When people say Pyromancer, they instantly think Demon Scar, and that's kind of, I don't know, it just feels a bit cheap. The damage is a bit low for casting, but it's a curved sword, and curved swords are OP, so it's an easy win-win, Using that weapon, you don't have to be great at spacing. If you don't know how far an R1 is, you can just fire Surge instead. It just seems really, it's very user-friendly, put it that way.
So you've played in a few PvP tournaments. Tell us about your experiences in them, what you liked and didn't like.
Oh man, tournaments are their own sort of special monster. I always get so worked up, so nervous and a lot of tension. But then, you kind of get that thinking who you might be up against and who you might be against if you win, and are you going to screw up? But I've kind of found there's no better ground for testing a build out and testing yourself out using it. It removes most excuses and doubt. If it didn't work for a reason. If it did work, you can look back and see how it worked. If you're looking for any way to improve yourself, then just do a tourney, and you can just go and watch it back with the host perspective and see what you've done wrong, what you've done right, and what you can improve moving forward. I'd say if people are wanting to get better, then do one. It's quite helpful.
Do you mind telling us about anyone that you look up to in the Dark Souls community? Any mentors, YouTubers, or streamers? People that have influenced you?
See, I don't know, I don't tend to play like other people, so I don't really have anything to help me as such. However, I do like to watch some of the better melee guys and see what they do which set themselves apart from other people, and what doesn't work for them, and what habits they develop to put themselves above other people, and how people try to copy it. If you see these little tactics and techniques a little bit sooner rather than later, it'll help you fight against it a bit better. But no particular order, I would say the people who are most like my idols and the ones I look out for is going to be G9, Painted Phantoms, and B-Dubs. They have 3 entirely different styles, 3 different setups they've all tried to main: Great Sword, Sword and Board, and Curved Sword. And in my eyes, in my opinion, they're the best at each of their fields.
Here. So any plans to go to Elden Ring if it has PvP? Maybe check it out first? Are you excited at the possibility?
Dude, I'm so hoping Elden Ring is going to be an actual evolution of everything we have right now, mixed in with some of the better aspects of Dark Souls 2. I mean, nobody hated power stancing. I do not know why it was missed out number 3. It's ridiculous. A new backdrop, a new area, new lore, you know, for PvP and exploration would be really nice. There's a certain air around a new Dark Souls game when nobody knows what's going on or what's around the corner, unaware of what's gonna one-shot you, and things you'll come to learn is you know, a mimic, if they have any new styles of mimics. God knows they're gonna add a mimic ladder or a mimic bonfire in the next game. That'll be a lovely nightmare to have. But yeah, I'm hopefully looking forward to it. That should be good.
What would you like to see in Dark Souls 4 if we ever got it?
I would honestly like to see more spell variety, like we had in Dark Souls 2. Having variety will extend the game's longevity. When you see a dude with a curved sword, you know it's going to be one style of play. When you see a dude with a sword and shield, you know it's going to be another. But what would be nice would be like the casting catalyst we had in Dark Souls 2. The shield that can cast Faith, that was pretty cool. The weapon catalyst we got now, some of them are pretty cool. Some of them are a bit useless and are a bit in a league of their own, but yeah, those would be good little additions. And from the community, I'd like to see a bit more work and hustle, trying to flesh out the game's mechanics, not leaving it so long to be unknown. Trying to work out the bugs so we can bring them to light for the developers. We have issues in Dark Souls 3 which we could have probably solved if we'd complained loud enough a couple of years ago, but now it's just too late. That's just the way things go. It'd just be nice if people come together and work for the greater good. I suppose that's just how things go, I suppose.
Alright, well thanks so much DarkMatter for stopping by. I appreciate you taking the time to answer some questions for the Dark Souls community.
Cheers, man. Thanks for having me on. Take it steady.
You can find DarkMatter's link to his YouTube channel in the video description. Also, hop into the Blood Souls and Salt Discord server if you'd like to talk to him directly. Thanks so much, everyone, and I'll see you next time.